I was like, look at people coming in. Wow.
It's a party.
Look at that. Look at all these peeps coming in.
Wow.
Look at all these peeps. I'm gonna take my background off because it's going crazy. We're just waiting for a minute or two to let people, everybody. So welcome. And if you want to just say hello in the chat, feel free to drop a little hi from wherever you are. I see that there's people from literally all over the world right now here. Some of you are like, well, welcome.
Welcome.
Amazing to have everybody joining us virtually, joining us.
Yes. Tell us, where are you joining us from?
Yes.
Really all over the world. Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. Maybe you also want to ask us this. You have the link. It's on the Eventbrite. It's really nice to see all these
Super
folks.
nice to see all these people.
Yes.
People at home hanging out, all the books, all the snacks, the coffee. What else am I seeing here? I'm seeing, let's see. Pierre, what are you eating? You look like you're having a good time eating right now.
Just trail mix. It's my lunch.
Amazing.
Well, it's 12:03, so let's get it started. Hi, my name is Dina. I have brown hair and olive skin, and we are in Hello Departures. Really excited to be here today with all of you and all of you physically, virtually, across multiple spaces. Hello Departures is an experimental program at the intersection of design pedagogy, community, and strategy that I founded and currently trying to co-build with everybody who gets involved in this space. And today and yesterday and tomorrow, we started this Design Histories retreat with the goal to create some kind of open source compendium and rethink how we teach and design histories together. And we have Ramon Tejada, we have Tasheka-Arceneaux Sutton, we have Lisa Maione, we have Briar Levit, and we have Will Watson today in this space. Hi, and welcoming everybody, and thank you for being here today.
Yay.
I'll pass it on to whoever wants to lead this, you know, what we're doing, this workshop. I'm gonna drop a link in here. And then take it over, friends.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. That thing where you're like, are you looking at the screen? Are you looking at a screen? Are you looking at a screen? It's happening right now. So good to see everyone joining the space. We've been having some really some dynamic conversations between our group with other faculty, grad students, and staff at the University of Arkansas. And we've been compiling our notes and some of the ideas that have been coming up. And we wanted to use this hour joined by you all as a way to extend and invite all of you to into what is becoming a collaborative laboratory, how we might approach teaching and maybe being surprised by design and design histories.
Yeah, I think we've been we've been working in sort of a very loose way, in a loose form, and just trying things and talking about potentially what are different ways of approaching, what are looser ways maybe, or even what sort of emerged as sort of this bottom up rather than top down, which I think many of us sort of experience design histories and other ways of another courses in reality, right? Like it's not just about this is about how we learn. So whether we have all the knowledge and we sort of like drop it into somebody, or whether we actually create it together. So I think one of the things that we did a workshop yesterday with a group of grad students and some faculty here that actually became really, it sort of got really activated, and it was a 1 hour workshop. So we sort of started to sort of create a formal framework, if you will, with this Figma Jam document that we'll drop it in there again. And what we really wanted to do was to sort of activate the community to share with you sort of the way that we're prototyping this a little bit, if you will. This is a prototype, and then but also involving you from where you are, rather than just us sort of creating. And it's maybe getting away from the teacher with all the power and all the knowledge and everything, and thinking about that we know everything you need to know, but really putting ourselves in a vulnerable position of not knowing, and starting a class, starting a course, starting a curriculum from the position of we collectively gather it together, if you will. So maybe what we should
maybe just to add, we can share our screen in just a moment here, and maybe just just give you a tour of what this file is. Is that okay?
Yeah.
It's a nice way to start. There's some photographs in there.
I'm gonna drop it in there again for the people that just got here, so you have access to it, and it's editable by everyone. So you'll be able to literally add to it, and we encourage you to. We'll take you through it. So
Yeah.
And you can also feel free to like unmute yourselves and please chime in. Sometimes I know that we're all being respectful, so we mute ourselves. And sometimes it's nice to hear people's dogs in the background and kids. That's what happens when you have 6 computers open in the same space.
I was just trying to be casual and then I ruined it. We went into.
All right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's always good to have some echo at some point during the talk. Maybe just a brief overview. So in this document that you all have access to, just sort of overview for a moment, and we'll talk through each of the things that are here, but just overall, this is where we are. And I'll be zooming into the series of photographs that are in the center here. So these are just a few visuals from yesterday afternoon's conversation with, how many people were in the room? Maybe 15.
Yeah.
Where we we prompted our group to please go to their spaces, whether it be outside studios, wherever they have access to, and have 15 minutes to bring back either 1 to 3 items that are important to their person. So whether it was an item that they were wearing, whether something that was on their desk, a book, whatever it might be. And we didn't know exactly what with. So we sent everyone off. Came back to the room, and while everyone was gathering things, a few of us here made a frame on the floor and sort of spontaneously decided, okay, how about tape on the floor? Okay, maybe it's a spread, maybe it's a book, maybe it's this place that we can land in. So abstractly, a spread, literally a square, and in some ways maybe a place with edges so that we could see what we would be responding to. So when everyone came back, objects were laid on pieces of paper and captioned in addition there. And that then led to a discussion that just started with one artifact, someone who wanted to sort of speak first. And then from there, after sharing a few things about it, would maybe sort of see or would ask the group, if anything there that they just shared connected with something that they had put on the floor. And then the subsequent person would then connect, would take that one artifact with the next. And that went on for the 25 minutes that we spent talking together. And we all saw some really nice sort of emergent connections and conversation around design and histories that we wouldn't have planned, but absolutely came from the objects there. So I'll pause and see if you want to add.
There was also a lot of context shared. So there was some personal context, some historical context, and very local context. Some things that about how these artifacts, these pieces, these graphics, these forms have very specific meaning in certain spaces. But also realizing that one of the things that we realized was how some of these forms actually have meaning in multiple places that maybe coincides with similar meaning or diverge. So that was also part of the sharing, and a lot of it was done verbally because we were in this space of sharing some thinking that that was one way of doing it, of actually starting with a prompt that asks students or asks us all to sort of share a particular artifact. That we also said, and just to be clear, we also ask everybody to not bring graphic design artifacts, but to sort of privilege home and their own spaces rather than, you know, going to find those examples of graphic design that, you know, like that are formally like those examples, as a way to sort of start to think about what else do we need to be looking at that can inform, and then the creating of the web, developing a communal sort of like series of threads that can expand the narratives.
And each of them use their bodies together to connect their narratives physically. So it was both narratives and also lived in the space physically. So I think the exercise that we're gonna do today, we're not necessarily with our bodies in the same space, but we are on a Figma Jam virtually. Briar or Tasheka, do you wanna introduce?
Yeah, I just another way of saying this also was just the lenses of how we viewed these items emerge and how there are overlapping lenses of viewing these objects. And it's a nice way to see how this exact way of looking at items can translate to graphic design and how we make things and how we look at things that other people have made. So we had talked about different ways of creating some kind of loose structure to help educators who wanted to evolve their curriculum but were feeling a little overwhelmed. And there seems to be this idea that we need to be all-knowing as the professor, as an educator, and we need to know all the answers of everything that has happened in graphic design history. And this is, it's really impossible to know that history all out. And so, I mean, this has become more common to include components of classes that allow students to bring other histories into the class. It's definitely something I've done, but we started to take this a step further by looking at how we might create essentially ingredients for a curriculum that could then be mixed up in a more chance way. What's the word? Something more like
Randomness.
Random,
yeah.
So that students can see that, you know, we can make connections from any point, really. So do you want to describe the structure of it?
Yeah, so the idea is that, let's say you have a collection of like 100 images, and sometimes we struggle with trying to figure out like, okay, what image do we start with? Do we start thematically? Do we structure the class in a linear fashion that's more traditional? Do we start in reverse order? Do we start with a particular region? And sometimes even just kind of figuring out the framework or the structure of a design history class becomes really overwhelming. So we thought that this idea is sort of to develop this database or something where you have a carousel, I guess, of images. So every time, let's say you log onto this website that we do have code for on the board, we're not sure how well it works. Right, we can try. But the idea is that every time you sort of refresh, a new image will pop up. And so the idea is that it takes the pressure off of the professor as far as like figuring out, every day exactly what's going to be sort of discussed. And so whatever image pops up, which is new and surprising to the faculty as well as the student. And so the image would have a certain amount of information associated with it, like readings, or podcasts, or video, or a link to a website, as sort of a starting point to get a conversation started. And then what you're looking at right here is, so in the middle of the Figma board is sort of where we just, for example, started putting in images that we sort of thought that were sort of important to the discussion of design history. And then on the side are these kind of cards that either faculty or students can use as a way to sort of frame and talk about these particular images.
So there's the idea that perhaps you can say, you make the choice of selecting, making a selection of artifacts or objects, right? Like, or say, I'm gonna select 100 for an example, or I'm gonna select 10, right? And then the summertime, you're making this class and you're really just focusing on those, and you're creating some sort of structure. Maybe they're cards, or maybe there's just the images. And then in class, students can select randomly, and we start to create sort of this web in this way. And it could be created. We have two versions of it here. Actually, the blue area there in the middle is sort of like one version, which is just this board. But then take it a step further is you can develop it into sort of what we're calling flashcards. These are the cards at the bottom that we have a bunch open, so that we're going to ask you all to partake with us in this, where you can start to create sort of like these cards that have this information with keywords, possible other resources. But it could be that you can start these objects, and you as the faculty member, the teacher, knows already a little bit about each artifact, right? But that you're not going to know what the order of this is, because it's all by chance, right? And of course, you can digitize some of this. So for some of us, this could happen in an analog format and bring back those beloved flashcards that a lot of us used in school. Or for others, it would be that you actually develop a structure and a platform digitally, which uses code, and then you can randomize it with the student. So like it takes you off of the pedestal of the teacher that knows everything. Again, we go into a teaching mode of being facilitators and encouraging students to actually, all of us together, to develop this particular collection of design history and what it means to us. And then also just the idea that it keeps it. So there isn't, although we made this sort of mark that's like a book page, we kept talking about going outside of the margin. And there's no baseline. Yesterday, those images you see, there was no margin. I mean, there was no baseline. We weren't asked with everything on the same space. It was really moving around based on how people felt. So there's two sort of formats here. One is sort of very visual, and then another is sort of more formally made into sort of these flashcards, if you will. And again, thinking about making connections. How do we connect from one to the other? How does one thing that I posted connected to what Dina made a connection point, right? This piece by Bahia Shahab, right? The stencil piece, Crushed Flowers by Bahia Shahab, a stencil piece that Bahia designed it's involved in a lot of the Arab Spring, the project she did during the Arab Spring in Egypt. And then, like Dina connected it on the other side of the page to another artifact of design that was created. And there's a conversation there that's, that we can have. So making spaces for this work. So thinking about these connections that are going to appear in class live, rather than us as teachers constantly putting ourselves in the position of we know it all, and we're just going to bank it and give it to you. And this is what you should know. This is sort of having the students take authorship as well and agency in creating it together with them.
Sort of maybe just maybe one aspect to read that sort of underscores this is that So it's slideshow. Right? We're familiar with whether it's PowerPoint, a slide carousel, whatever it may be. There's some sort of like line of items or a line of artifacts. But what if you didn't know what the next slide would be? Because students also don't know what the slide might be. And you all at the same time are encountering something together for the first time, or maybe not necessarily the first time, but with whatever it is information you have at that time. But it's not because you plan to start with that image. It's not because anyone sort of chose it, but because it is sort of was deemed worthwhile, whether by you or a database. And again, we're interested in sort of open source aspect of this. Where everywhere, every image, every artifact, every system that we could have here is a starting point for a discussion, for a conversation. So we think of this as a tool that maybe can be used in lots of different ways. Maybe one of them is that it is the slideshow. And that as you go from one slide to the next, you don't know what slide is coming up. Students don't know what slide is coming up, and yet somehow a lecture emerges. It's also a way to maybe it's early in the morning. I teach at 8 a.m. Maybe the first thing is like random image. Okay, let's begin. Like, what do we see? What's here? How do we respond? What does this remind us of? Or perhaps it's a way to be able to create an assignment. On this thing would be the image and images that sort of help us understand an object. There are some links that contextualize, that sort of create some access points for what it is, and maybe other things that might not be just about it, but sort of help us understand that kind of gesture, that kind of system. Perhaps there's a reading, a podcast, a film, maybe multiples of these. There's a few key words. There's a few sort of like people or places, but that each of those can sort of be the foundation of an assignment, whether it's something that is done in class, whether it's something that is a reading room reflection, and we all do those things. Like, we are creating those clusters. So this is a way to be able to sort of call them up within kind of this database of possibilities. So we see that as sort of a partially leveling a classroom, and as a way to, again, know that every image, any image, everything that we're talking about can be the first slide, and can be the next slide. And that somehow between those things, the connections that we're talking about and want to bring up in our classes do.
Yeah.
And I was just gonna say, this is a prototype, like nothing is precious at all. Like, it can be messed with as much as you want. And then I guess what we tried to do yesterday is that we had about 15 people, and now we tried to do this between us, 4 or 5 people, and then we are 41 people in this audience. So like, it stretches from different settings and different ways that you can interpret this exercise in collaboration. So then this database actually keeps growing and growing.
Yeah, and I think also the good point about that is also starting to think about those of us that are teaching courses. Like every year you have this course, and then the challenge is how do you keep it, like how do you refresh it? This might be a way for you to think, I would never teach the same class because the randomizer actually doesn't allow, but it also serves the purpose of saying, okay, so maybe the students added things that I need to now add, so that the conversations evolve from one year to another, or students are reacting. And this is something Lisa's been doing in her class, so I'm just taking it away. I'm just sort of like quoting Lisa, like 1 year's class is actually reacting to the previous course or in conversation with the previous year, either augmenting, adding to, correcting things that they are researching further. So the thing about it being, like, it just keeps it, in many ways keeps it fresh. So part of the challenge that we have as teachers is like, oh, what are the initial things? What are those first 100 or the first 10 or however many numbers you choose? And whether you play the game of like, I'm going to take 10 of these or 25 of these every year and add something else.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So that, again, you're going to constantly add to the sort of the randomizer, to this database, and reacting to sort of a lot of this is actually reacting to the linearity of things. And we have a lot of, Dina has a lot of books here that are fabulous, but this idea, a lot of history books work on this like linear, like the linear, and you always see the date stamp, and you can sort of like picking up a book, and it was like, yes, everything is everything is organized by date. And perhaps this starts to allude to other ways of arranging this, and in a more organic way, an organic system emerges.
I was gonna talk about the database aspect. I could see a couple things happening. I could see one open source version that allowed for just the expansive knowledges that we all keep adding to it. And then I could see that, you know, each of us, you know, people may have something that they want to approach in their own classes. Maybe they're doing something specific. Maybe they want to look specifically in a, you know, a region or a specific format or something. And they could certainly build their database around that. But you could also make it available to other people. You know, the sharing of something like this is so much easier and free, you know, once you do it. And I love that.
So
And
go, Lisa.
Yeah, so for example, the way that we're beginning to think about this, and again, this might be just one way, but if you put 100 objects and descriptors into a Google spread or a Google Sheets, the Google Sheets is talking through JavaScript to a site, and it calls up that image and those parameters that are nearby to it whenever you're ready to use the tool. And that again, that spreads, or the Google Sheets example, I could have a Google Sheets, Ramon has a Google Sheets,
Right.
A class, you know, from a couple of years ago might have developed one, and we could sort of use or maybe talk to these different sort of like clusters of research. And again, it doesn't give us all of the research that was done about all of the things, but it gives us these entryways, and again, to sort of bring alive what we might be wanting to bring into the conversation. And it has ties and maybe the, so, I mean, I'm just sort of speaking out loud, but it's not quite a blockchain, but in a way, like it is a little bit of its own ledger that has this maybe way of being just a set of documents that are shareable that then are sort of offered. to
Yeah.
others.
And I was thinking some of you have put on the chat, I'm looking at the chat, like leveraging already existing archives, right? So like we
Yeah,
have a list of like the Letterform archive, the Post Graphic Design archive, sort of the archive from the Cooper Hewitt, and you know, like the multiple archives that have been developed, particularly in the last year and a half, 2 years. A lot of really amazing work has been done by a lot of people. Some of you who are in this room right now, in this collective space that we have, Google Sheets, I mean, all sorts of like incredible work. And you could, in essence, use an array, you know, with code and actually source from those. So even expand it more and say, hey, I want this generator to pick pieces from there as well. So that again, it's sort of keeping it fresh and you know, it does, in many ways, it does challenge us as teachers to sort of be prepared to speak about an even larger array of things. But maybe what it is just thinking about how we prompt students or how we prompt the conversation so that we can all gather the knowledge together rather than, oh, this artifact comes up and I know everything about it, because that's actually not the reality. Like you don't know everything about it, but we can in class live in the moment engage with each other to sort of find out about it. And maybe that's
Demonstrate
research. There we go. Demonstrate research. Thank y'all.
That could be one.
And
to-
one of the most exciting things about all this is really connecting all these ideas in their different contexts, in their different worlds.
Yeah.
And I think part of both the sort of balance between kind of feeling secure with knowing versus feeling like there's a randomness. So I think part of the encouragement with this kind of model is that, you know, it is 100 images. You know them, you've looked at them before, but you don't know which one will come up next.
Right.
So I think it's that sort of, that it's almost like that sort of flow state, right? Where it's between kind of being bored and being like, what's the other parameter? Someone probably out there knows, but it's sort of a perfect anxiety and boredom, right? It's like that perfect middle where it's sort of like, you know, if you know which slide is coming next, like you've done this a million times before, boom, 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 versus anxiety, like you have absolutely no idea what's coming up. Like, who knows, coming from the People's Archive, it's coming from the Cooper Hewitt, it's coming from the Arab Design Archive. Like, yeah, like that would be terrifying, right? But somewhere in between, right, is that you've seen a lot of really great things. You don't know exactly in what order they're coming in. And that keeps you alive, keeps maybe us alive. And as everyone has been adding here, that we can add to one another's, we are always adding to our repositories. And is this the only tool you would use in a class? Perhaps not, but it could be. But it also is a way to kind of maybe counterbalance expectations with expertise and what it is that we're doing when we are together in a room learning something.
It's also, I think it's a great way to sort of think about how we're expanding the narratives, and we're talking about the histories, because so many of us are talking about histories rather than the history of graphic design thus far. And this is a great way, because you could say I have 100 and I'm gonna make a structure that picks 10 here, 10 there, 10 here, 10 there, 10 there, 10 there, so that you are actually having a broader selection of work from a larger sort of context, if you will, right? Like it's just I'm really thinking about where are my students coming from? For those, like a lot of us sort of know where a lot of our students that we teach are coming from. So maybe you start to think about, how do I link where they're coming from to this course? So they see themselves in the course, right? Like, so they see themselves represented in the work that we're talking about, and it's not this thing where the students leave and they're like, I never saw myself represented there, so I don't know what am I doing here? Like, what am I doing in this field where obviously I'm not represented? So thinking about ways of going there. So yeah.
Should we invite people now to contribute?
Yeah.
Why don't you show an example of one?
Yeah, let's maybe walk
Okay.
through one. So after we did this activity here, we thought, okay, like it might be sort of like, let's maybe conceive of how these might live on these, maybe this idea of this card or cards. So below here, and any of you can maybe take on. Do you want to walk through this one here? Or wait, this one's.
So so for example, again, we started up above, right? So that's one way of doing it and doing the connection. So you can, we're going to encourage you to do either one and then I took it down to the card where I was also thinking about, oh, this is actually a really great format to have graphic design students design these cards. Like maybe the outcome is you have to design X amount of cards that then become this whole set of cards or this set of flashcards the students can do. So I was thinking, okay, so this is the logo for Chapulín Colorado, which is a really famous kids Mexican TV show, which I used to watch as a kid. And a lot of people that are in this chat that are of Latinx descent probably have encountered. Some of you have encountered this character as well. This is the logo that Chapulín is just a suit and it's this logo. So maybe, there's a little bit of a description from Wikipedia about this was a Mexican television show that ran from 1973 to 1979. It's a parody of superhero shows created by Roberto Gómez Bolaño, who played all the main characters, right? And then I started to think about some keywords, which included logos, typography, Mexico, TV, motion graphics. Maybe there's some readings. I didn't get to the readings of the podcast. Thinking about that the readings are not always readings, that we need to think about different ways of engaging students with these ideas. Maybe it's a podcast. There's so many people on so many amazing podcasts and video. There's a video of an episode there that's connected to the logo. So you see a link of one of the episodes. But then there's also links to other things and then associations, which kind of a different way of thinking about keywords, at least for me, right? So thinking about typography, thinking about Mexican design, thinking about comedy. So, if we each were to go through these, but also open them up so that others can add to it, we're developing a collective piece. And we did a similar thing to the first cover of The Bluest Eye. I didn't get too far into it, but that it also can be by adding images. So there's the cover of The Bluest Eye, but also has the book open up so you can see that amazing image of Toni Morrison's back cover in relation to the front cover, but also speaks about larger associations. For example, Toni Morrison's relationship to the design of the books of her novels, and also any book that she edited. She was the art director for all of those books. It wasn't just farmed out to Herb Lubalin to do this cover. She was actually art directing him on this, partly because of the way she believes. So thinking about what are the associations, the keywords, the ways that we can sort of map out and create connections between design artifacts and culture. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's 12:35.
Yeah.
So we'd love to just open up some time for to invite you all to hop in. So again, there's two different ways to maybe to engage. We have the group of cards, which whether it's beginning with this configuration, but where exactly all of these things go, whether it's the image is centered, the associations are around it. There's just some starting to see them as starting points. But we'd love to see what else might be in this collection. What would be sort of things that you would want to make sure are maybe visible, talked about, and thought about together as a group. So the prompt here is for you, for each of you. What is one image, artifact, system from graphic design histories and design histories that you would like to see discussed between students and faculty over the course of a semester? Perhaps there's more than one, but to begin at least with one. So a few steps. Offer an image representing this. Accompany this image with maybe a link to a reading, a podcast, some videos, a book in particular, maybe a film or a conversation. Perhaps there's an interview between people that might offer some good context for a conversation around this artifact or system. Perhaps name, title, label of some kind, and a brief caption or footnote that you'd like to personally add. Perhaps there's a critical question or two that you would love to have others ask for this, or maybe that's the question that you come to that object with every time you encounter it. And if you're interested and willing to add your name, pronouns, and email, so that there's a way to connect back to you as a contributor and sort of a part of creating this particular go at this collection. So if you are feeling more free form, feel free to hop into this space here in this the blue area. And whether you want to make a cluster, right, of a thing, reading and a video, great. If that's helpful to you, fantastic. And the other invitation is down in below to grab a card and add some image or images and that give us context around thing. So we'll maybe hold, say 5-6 minutes for folks to do a few
What do we
things.
do, like 10 minutes?
10
10 minutes, and then we can, and then we
Look at what
spend,
we have.
when then we look at what we have, and
Yeah.
then we can have people engage.
Perfect.
And also, I think it'd be wonderful as people are doing this, if you want to unmute your mics
Mhm.
and you want to contribute to the conversation as we're working on things or thoughts. The chat has been really wonderful. Many of you have like reacting to what we're saying, but it'd be really nice to hear all of you, any of you that are interested in sort of if you are hearing your reactions to some of this as you're working through these. And again, think about, you can work wherever you want to work, whether it's just the picture up above, or you want to think of the cards, or you want to start with this section here, section 1, and then you want to port things down. It's up to you, or whether you want to make connections from the top section to the cards. Okay, so
And we
yeah.
really encourage you to break the grid and not stick to anything, like
Yes.
make it your own, and contribute however you feel like contributing.
Love it.
And then another thing maybe is if you can find examples that are what's the C word?
Canon.
That are just from varied perspectives and from varied places in the world, that would be also great.
Yeah. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and join the conversation as you're doing this, feel free. Any questions, comments, thoughts, feel free to chime in. Or if anybody has tried something like this, I know at RISD there is a professor in the industrial design department who has taught the quote unquote history class, and he uses 100 objects every year and just changes them, because I remember talking to him and he said, I just got really bored of using the same thing. It's just boring. So I just started to change it, and it's kind of exciting. And then there's also, there's a history of like, we talked about the Phaedon, like 500 artifacts of graphic design. The last time I saw that box, it was as a stool I sat on. So I don't know, I'm like, yeah, but thinking about how do we again expand the history. And everybody laughed, but it was a stool, because some artifacts of design are meant to be sat on.
Yeah, it's functional that
It's
way.
functional. It's really fun. So
it's a nice idea also to connect to other items, other cards that you see.
yes.
So like, for instance, I connected the Cherokee syllabary to the Hangul the history of fungal's creation. So things like that are nice within this particular database.
Yes, if you paste the video link into Figma Jam, it will upload the video from YouTube, which is pretty amazing. And also, yeah, there's some really neat little tools to sort of like bring in information and for stuff.
Copying and pasting. And maybe part of these narratives are not necessarily design per se, as design has been defined from a Western perspective. Like maybe these are narratives that are important to you and your background, and like trying to connect these things to who we are as people inside this world.
And also for students thinking about, because I think thinking about like what is the work that students want to make and the communities they want to work with or engage with, thinking about developing ways of bringing forth those narratives in a more respectful way, even their own communities. I'm thinking about how a lot of this is about elevating it. So like it's technically it's all design, but like we sort of partition like capital D design. At least I think about it as capital D design, which is all this stuff in all these books, aka the canon, versus the stuff that lives in so many of our communities that is so wonderful. And sometimes capital D design has appropriated and stolen that and turned it into really problematic pieces of work. Design is littered with those examples. So yeah, nice. Again, if anybody's interested, please, you feel free to unmute yourself and share anything that you're thinking about.
Well, have you read that book, Are We Human by
Yep.
Beth Huscomina?
Yep.
See, and in that book, actually, yeah, Beth Huscomina, in that book, there is another collaborator.
Yep, Mark
Wrigley.
Okay. The main thesis of that book is that everything is design. So it doesn't have to be a poster. And
This book,
yeah,
maybe some of you have had it. It's a really fantastic, they're both architects, right? They're both architects, but it's just amazing. It's called Are We Human? Notes on an Archaeology of Design.
it was published by
Lars Mueller.
publishers.
Lars Mueller publishers, but yeah, they do make some incredible, and some of the table of content, it's really provocative.
Yeah,
The
and
way
the
they-
photos too.
Design of perversion, the design of health, designing the body, the unstable body, human-centered design, the ornamental species, the plastic human. I mean, there's just they're really provocative sort of ways of looking at things.
So one example that happened yesterday, one brought soil, and it's like, how do you see soil as design, and how do you connect it to design? And it was a really beautiful conversation when you start connecting these narratives and what every or any element can represent to each person.
And what was nice about that is that it was a reminder that what our influences are from many things. And they are read and understood as we contextualize and share them different ways. I think part of that conversation, for example, with the soil, was for the person who brought it in, that it was a connection to the way that their grandfather, when first came to where he landed, sort of like the first thing he did at the house was to sort of build like a garden of vegetables. And then that's something that person who was speaking, their practice is absolutely related to soil and earthworms and the sort of state of how the cycles of nature. And then someone else in the room said, oh, when I saw that soil, I immediately thought of home, because where I'm from is a huge, it's like agricultural sort of like center of our country. And their symbol also sort of like spoke to that connection. So then that could lead us to someone's jewelry and necklace, and how that connected with, you know, theirs and their sister and their mother's necklace, that they all share of that same object. And there's something about the scale of it, the way it was drawn, and its form that felt connected. So thinking about how those things are also embodying of, in a way, a graphic reading. It didn't need that these things needed to be graphic design, but it related to their graphic designer-ness or their designer-ness. And I think that's part of what is centered here, is that it comes from the people who are in conversation, and that if we're able to use those things as the prompts for one another, we are able to see how those things tie and connect, as well as tie and connect with what we're pointing, we want to bring in.
It also gave space for like thinking about, so the idea of like what this idea of home and what that is, right? So like thinking about that, perhaps one of the things that we started to realize was that we were talking about not so much just about the artifact, but the ideas behind this artifact, and also some signifiers of like one of the pieces of jewelry was an evil eye, and then we started to have a conversation as to how that idea of an evil eye, of that form of an evil eye, appears in multiple cultures, right? Like, and similar to like the evil eye, it is kind of sort of the evil eye, but the form changes depending on the culture, right? And they use who has it. Like in Latin cultures, a lot of kids get the evil eye, the little babies. So that gave us that opportunity to really start to think about, oh, here's this idea and how it manifests in a visual form that at times has been appropriated by graphic design, because the evil eye form has been appropriated by graphic design sometimes to create icons, but it's got a lot of significance in particular cultures. So having students informed about the multiplicity of meaning that an icon, that a form has in multiple cultures is actually critical if they're going to be making graphic design now for us, rather than thinking about like historical graphic design, right?
And what I loved in particular about that evil eye is that it started with something that was so, it was almost one of those things, and I'll just speak for myself, it sort of felt like I recognized that moment of like, it's when a student brings in something and you're like, you know, you're trying to get them to bring something interesting in, they bring a thing and you're like, oh my God, that is so, because they're like afraid, there's like no meaning behind it, it's just a random thing, they clearly didn't do their homework, they're just like dropping something off their desk, and you're just kind of like, okay, a keychain, thanks, like this was really deep. But what was nice was that it was like, yeah, like, okay, it's like not that you started with nothing, but it's sort of like, it is something. We are able to sort of find a way in, and then that got to a really interesting conversation around like symbolism and shared meanings, and also sort of slightly different meanings in these different places. And then that could then again be a part of a lot of different other sort of like not just exits, but just other threads that again we might be excited and want to make sure that we're talking about. But it started from there. It started from like truly like almost a superficial thing, was just like, I like this, and it's like, okay. But instead of being like, okay, it was more like, okay, here we go. And to sort of show it, or at least that's what that was part of my moment, or when I saw that on the floor, it was like, okay.
But it was also sort of the way that we were also sort of like engaging with the artifacts in a way that we opened ourselves to the validity of so many things, and the importance, they are valid, right? And that is a really beautiful thing to see, that what appears to be sort of like just a little mundane little thing for somebody, that has a lot of value to so many other people. And if you're looking at things that are of value to you, then you become more interested in the things, and you start to unravel the multiple narratives. I mean, the evil eye also talked a little bit about color, the different color manifestations of it. So you bring that conversation in. And that just, it created sort of like a 7-minute really rich conversation that actually engaged many of us. Like several of us were talking about this idea, what this little tiny artifact brought out.
And part of the point is that our histories, who we are, our positionality, everything that makes us individuals and in collectivity, in the community, is part of design history, is part of how we teach, and is part of how we learn it. So really it crosses boundaries.
We have 10 minutes. Does anybody want to share some thoughts or comments, suggestions?
I'll stop sharing my screen so we can.
I have a question.
Go for it, Silas Monroe.
This is amazing. By all the work that y'all are doing and like organizing this. I'm sort of curious, when you invite the perspective of not being an expert on something, when new materials or materials are coming into the classroom, or like even you're discovering things and like you don't have all the answers. Like actually I'm about to put something on here. It's this publication from the 80s called Men of Color. And like I have a copy of it. And I know that this person, Vega, made it. Like how do you, if you have having trouble finding information about this, which I am, how do you do that? And then also if you're a teacher and you're in the space of the classroom and you have this artifact, whether it's you, contributor, or student, and there's like gaps, do you have suggestions on how to navigate when it's like there isn't really necessarily an answer that's like on hand? Or maybe like a sidebar, if like how do you deal with maybe the discomfort that could come up in a situation of as an educator facilitator, where there's like, for me sometimes I'm like feeling pressured to like cite something or like have like an answer, and I think it's probably totally okay not to, but I'd just be curious to hear like how others like navigate any of that.
We really need to share resources. I don't think we can do this alone. And the point is that just let's share things together and let's add to these gaps.
But I would say, Silas, I mean, I think, Briar, you wrote something there. I see Rick Griffith just wrote something in there. But I think part of it is, like, we have to be comfortable not knowing. Like,
Yeah.
we have got to, like, let it go that if a student asks us a question that we have to know the answer. Because the reality of that has been, that's also been damaging at times, where we just, like, spoken out of our left and we don't know what we're talking about, and we're pretending. And I think many of us have put ourselves in the position of saying that. So can we model, like, let's find out about it together. I think one of the things this morning when we were talking over breakfast, like, imagine, it sounds risky. I'm gonna go into class and I don't know anything about these things, and I'm going to model and work with the students to learn about this together and figure out what happens when the trail of information stops. Like, where can we go? Is that an opportunity to, you know, let's see if we can find somebody, I don't know, Cooper Hewitt just popped into my mind, where like, is that an opportunity to invite other people to see, hey, we have this collection of artifacts that we're looking at and the trail dies. Does anybody know about this information? Or this is one of those, I think, good uses of social media, which is like, hey, does anybody know about this artifact? Like the same way that many of us would say, hey, does anybody know what typeface this is? I know I've done that. And many of you have been like, oh, that's that. And I'm like, oh, wow, thank you. Right. So I think it's thinking about like the community can contribute. And by the community, we mean like external as well, how we use each other as resources. In all these, you know, like many of you in faces that I'm looking at right now, we have been in Zoom chats for like what appears to be almost 4 years now. And we've developed this amazing community where we can send each other things. And ask. So, but anyway, go ahead, Tasheka.
Yeah, I also think that we've been taught and we've been so caught up in like knowing everything about a particular artifact, like, okay, who designed it, what it was designed for. I think sometimes we actually sort of lose sight on like, you know, I know that publication you're referring to, Silas, and sometimes it's about, I learn a lot just from the content. And so it's like, okay, if it's, let's just say, for instance, a publication. So reading the publication, okay, who is the editor? Who is the publisher? Is there a series? What was going on at the time that made this publication come to life, or why it was even needed in the first place? So I think sometimes it's like moving beyond the actual graphic design thing in itself and sort of diving deep more into like, well, what the thing is about. So sometimes it's, you know, it is graphic design if it's like sort of the typeface that was designed. So maybe you can do some history, you know, about that, and has it been used before, and how it's been used, you know, prior up until this point, or things like that. And I think, again, just being vulnerable sometimes, and being okay with, again, saying, hey, I don't know. But I think the beauty of it is sort of taking that journey with your students and trying to give them a different perspective to try to find that information, but also giving them sort of confidence to like reach out to somebody else that may know more
Yeah.
about
And I think one thing that's critical about that, particularly in the spaces of teaching courses in academia, is we have got to establish that on the first day of class. Like, if you don't write this in your syllabus, as we were chatting on the thing, like saying workshop, you have got to sort of say, like, I make it a habit. I don't mind spending the entire first day in a class on the syllabus, just so they understand I don't function the way that you think, or that any of you think, or however you think, or however you're used, or however, you know, so-and-so teacher you had taught. I'm interested in working in this way, so that we can start, and there are understanding that we're going to work in this class in this modality. And I think that that's important and critical, that the syllabus document, that many of us are like, the syllabus, it clearly states this. This is the way that we work in this. This is the modality. Therefore, I'm not going to know everything, right? Like, therefore, I'm not going to be the teacher standing in a podium, and clicking through slides. I'm actually going to be here with you all, discovering, even if you already know a little bit about every artifact that you're using, you still sort of play the, like, let's discover it together, because I think that creates a particular way of students engaging. Other thoughts people have? Thanks, Silas, for spearheading the conversation, chatting.
Well, just thank you. That was really helpful to like be able to build things around it, or like find other leads, and like it's okay that there are gaps. It's like
It's okay.
it's-
It's okay. No.
I mean, I added this in the chat, but it's like, that's part of its identity, is that we don't know much about it. Like, that is information about it. The fact that we don't know much about it, right? And that is useful and interesting to know, that there isn't much out there. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have that information somehow connected to it. Will we ever know in our lifetimes? Maybe not, but maybe we do. But we can acknowledge that. We can acknowledge that together.
Anybody else wants to share, or a comment, or a question, or thoughts?
I have a question, sorry.
Go, you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a kind of like a difficult question. But it's about kind of like, you know, like how when we build things together, like putting a little resources from many different places. I think one of the things I always think about, especially when we're bringing new people or people that are newer to the content, is like, how do we to like prevent from exoticizing or othering or even stereotyping a whole culture, just based on selecting, let's say, a couple of iconic images, right? Or one iconic image. So I think there's a very difference between not knowing, right? Just like letting things come in, or having very superficial knowledge, and also being aware of your own biases when it comes to a lot of these topics. So I think everyone in this room, because we've been, again, going to the same Zoom calls for the past 4 years, think kind of critically and is hopefully aware of, you know, their biases and are actively like working towards that. But is there any guidance, let's say, for doing this for, let's say, newer educators, or kind of how to do this in the classroom when you start seeing like things are getting perhaps a little bit out of hand? Or how do we set up some things in place, or maybe just ways to steer the conversation in a way that, you know, adds complexity and it's not just, oh, that's cool. I know doing connection is one way of doing that, but if we're also acknowledges that we don't know, like how are ways in which we can perhaps build some sort of like knowledge and kind of like communal understanding of what we're looking at when we kind of like still figuring it out. So that's my question. I don't know if anyone has thoughts, but curious about that.
That's a great question, actually, and I just want to offer an exercise I've done with my students, and Will is here present, and he can talk about it in Design Histories. But I asked them to reflect on their positionality and really truly think through it, and write a statement about it. And that was done within the setting of, okay, let's talk about who we are, how does it inform what we make and what we research, what we say, and how we do things. And that helped in simply acknowledging, you know, those biases that you're talking about, and that we don't know everything, but also the way we research and do things is informed by those biases and who we are.
I would say that part of what's different about these from flashcards, right? Like a flashcard of the fight on, I'll just pick on that. So they, like, for example, there's that poster about, there's the poster that is the forest, right? So it's like the Japanese character, the Chinese character for like tree, and then like grove, and then forest, and like it's all around everyone, and it's like very beautiful and blah, blah, blah. But I feel like that when it doesn't have critical questions next to it, other words that someone who is more deeply understanding of what else we could be thinking about or looking at, like, why was there a poster about forests in that year in Japan at that time? I think that's something that isn't so offered, right, on the flashcard or the fight on card. But I think with something like this, I think the idea is that the offering, right, is framed with some critical questions, does have context that gives us not a superficial reading, but those other things are what give it more. It's not just like more things about that one thing, but more like what are things that make more complex like how we understand this thing. And I think that's where the work is, right? The work is sort of being able to create like a triangulation or an intersection of these items that if you want to type, you can.
Yeah.
You can type
And
in here.
also,
But just to complete the thought, that I think that is, yeah, I don't want Japanese things to be exoticized over and over again, that we just see like, oh, like it's so cool, it's like Yuko Tanaka, like so cool, like yeah, and then all of those are beautiful, but and there's people in this room who have done more research on those things and have a much wider understanding of like, why were those posters like 16 colors at that time? Why are they so gigantic? Like, where were they posted? Were they posted anywhere? You know, so all to say that, like, do I have all the answers to all those questions? No, but I think with time and research and doing it, like, I would be able to both, you know, from others, from myself, from of what we know, to make an interesting cluster. And I think the clustering is the point here. It's not ID cards, and it's not just showing the thing, but it's like the thing plus context, and engaging that context together,
Right.
and using that sort of entry point as a key to a, it's not a key to a door into a room, but in a little bit, like you walk into a room and there's like things on the shelf, and there's like there's like a funny lamp and like a weird hat on the bed, and it's sort of like you wonder like who was here, like what is all this stuff, but in a way doing that, but with artifacts of design, with the podcasts and references and films that we show. So that would be my offering for that in response to that.
Huda just asked really important questions. Hi, Huda. How do you verify the verity or accuracy of the added information? And how do you avoid fake information? And how do you implement this method within the set and often rigid institutional syllabi and course descriptions?
Well, I mean, there was a comment earlier about like lecture courses, and I think, I mean, you have to start to, at least if you are able to figure out how you sort of hack into like, what is a lecture course? Like, I don't do lectures. Like, it's on my syllabus. I tell students day one, I don't do lectures. Like, I do conversations. So, you know, if you're able to, within the parameters of your institution, I think you can sort of start to be an artist and designer, which a lot of us love to talk about. And then we need to be a little more radical about shifting the structure of it within the framework that we have, right? Like, so does a lecture mean that you're always standing in front of the classroom? I don't know, right? Like, I don't know if that's what that means, even if you're in a lecture hall. I mean, I've taught in lecture halls too. I also start to think about, there's other resources that you can use to sort of, at least that's the way that I've gone about it, as to here's proof of the way that this works pedagogically in other places. And I think it's important for us to move in that direction. So showing examples of other people that are also doing it, so that people are now like, oh, you just came up with this idea. And it's like, no, I'm actually in conversation with a bunch of people that are trying it, other teachers, other faculty members, other designers. And here's the proof of how it is, because so many times I think in academic institutions we're being put against showing that this works. Proof. You need to show me proof. So here's the proof. And then if I take without your question about like how do we deal with sort of like making sure verifying information, I think that that's part of the conversation that you have with the students as you're making the thing. This is like, where are you getting this information from? Can you sort and cite everything? right? Even if it's a link to Wikipedia, can you tell me where this information is coming from so that we have the information cited? And I think that that's one way that I think about how to make sure that the information is correct or that the information is verifiable, but also being open to the fact that next year's class, and I'm again thinking about Lisa's project, that a student is doing something similar and found more information about this artifact, and therefore edited in many ways the entry to make sure and clarify it. So that's a try at your big question, but I know that's particularly the question about within the institutional system. That's a bigger question because many of us don't work in the same sort of structure. So I think part of it is like, how do you create a hack structure that is sustainable for you to actually do this thing that you want to do versus relying on like, oh, I need to do this the way that it's been done, but it doesn't actually work. And it's actually damaging the students and damaging me at the same time. Like it's not helpful. Rick has his hands up, and then we just want to, it's 1:06, so we're a little bit over, so we just want to respect people's time, but Rick, go for it.
Hi guys, thanks for giving me a chance to chat. The two things came to mind. Number one was that, you know, just combined with the thought that like Ramon does not do lectures, does conversations, some part of this battle against superficiality is one, because the format changes and that people have to acknowledge each other and young people are kind of forced into a community versus a lecture hall. And I think that there's some real win from that speaks almost directly, or well, it speaks indirectly to Juan's like sort of statement about like, how do we kind of battle this superficiality, or how do we battle this kind of cultural appropriation? And then the second part is that one of the assignments that I created seemed to work continuously towards that, and that was engaging the students in what I call a form language, asking them to identify or create a form language, actually sort of had them participate in meaning making in form fairly early in the process. And I think when they can identify meaning making in form, then what happens is it continues to reinforce the sort of battle against superficiality and cultural appropriation, because they know that forms have meanings, and therefore they are expecting to find meaning in all forms. And that's just what I thought I would offer to that. So thanks for letting me have a chat.
I know it's 1:08,
yeah.
so we want to respect people's time, and thank you all for joining us.
It seems like 1 hour is definitely not enough to
No.
have these conversations. I just want to say this is the beginning of something we planted a seed together, and hopefully this seed continues to grow, and we continue to connect, and we continue to talk about these really important conversations, so that we can actually collectively change design education.
Yeah. I think we'll save the chat and put a link to it
Yes.
on the Figma. And then Dina, you're gonna post the positionalities
I will.
exercise on there as well for people to use. And there's people have also dropped a lot of stuff in the chat. So we're gonna save it so you can have access to
I
it.
will share Will's example.
Yeah.
And I'll just shout out to Teresa Moses and Lisa Mercer. The Racism Untaught book has a lot of really great exercises as well. So for those who have that on hand or can take a look, those are useful for a lot of different contexts, but certainly this one.
Yeah.
There will be a recording of this on Hello Departures and our YouTube, so you can always go back to this whenever. And I'll put the link also on the website, and put it on Instagram, so it will be everywhere, so you have access to this one more time. And just don't hesitate to reach out to any of us, really, so that we can continue these conversations. And obviously we will see each other in the next Zoom meeting somewhere, sometime.
Thank you,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. All the love.
Thank you.
We just want to up one and wait till everybody goes.
Yes.
Yeah. We're gonna do Zoom pop. So whoever these last, you can, if anybody wants to just say anything,
Good hanging out.
feel free to hang out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll stop the recording.
Thanks for all the feedback, everybody, on all the thoughts.
Yeah.